Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. We're going to discuss about our new 3D viewer, which we have released in the latest release, Petrosys PRO 2021.2. Having said that, over to you, Jason.
Thanks, Abilio. So today we're going to run through the Petrosys 2021.2 release of the 3D viewer. So we've made a lot of changes to the 3D viewer so that we can go forward with a few of the other programs and projects that we wanted to run. So today I'll run through the improved performance, how that's been implemented in the 3D viewer, the new interface that we've implemented as part of that release, the drag and drop features that we've added into the 3D viewer, the well log curves which we've also added into the 3D viewer, the one-click creation from mapping, which is now a simple click of a button to create all of your data from mapping in the 3D viewer, the shared cursor that we now have between the 3D viewer and the mapping window, some of the improved layer management that we have in the 3D viewer, and then I'll run through a demonstration as well. So Petrosys has updated the 3D viewer because we're looking at bringing out a few more features such as cross sections, which we want to use to enhance our software, and part of that step was to improve the 3D viewer to allow it to interact between different windows. And we also decided that we'd add in the enhancements to speed and rendering of images and loading performance. So when we load grids now, the largest improvement with the time to load and display grids is up to 10 times faster, and with frame rates when we move the display around 2 to 10 times faster for the large data sets. And we can also handle much larger data sets than before, both with grid sizes and number of wells displayed. And the application now uses extensive multi-threading, which allows the user interface to remain responsive while the application is working in the background and loading and rendering the data. And because of this, we've needed to increase the requirements for the 3D viewer. So now you need a mid to high-end graphics card, preferably an NVIDIA GeForce or better, and you'll need at least 32 gig of RAM as recommended to run the larger data sets. So when we redid the 3D viewer, we improved all aspects of that. So we improved the ribbon maps of the way that the user's interface is viewed and seen. So it's more aligned with our modern Petrosys panels that we have, and it makes it easy to find the options that you're looking for. So we've got larger icons, and the text is in a smaller setup, the top level menus, and we've got just 3 top level menus now, and you can click on those and you get a ribbon for each. So you can easily find what you're looking for and looking to do. We've added in drag and drop, so we can now drag files from Windows or Linux File Explorer onto the 3D window, and that will be displayed as a display item. And we can also drag and drop items from Petrel, Decision Space, and Excel, drag directly into the 3D viewer to display those on the 3D viewer as well. We've implemented log curves, so we've been able to display log signatures in Petrosys mapping for a while now, and we've added in that feature to be as part of the 3D viewer. So a single log curve can now be rendered down each well path as either a trace down the side, which we can also decide the direction of orientation that we want that to be displayed, or we can also display it as one of the spherical wiggle traces as well. We have a one-click creation now. So in Petrosys mapping, we have this icon at the top of the mapping toolbar, and when we click on that icon, all of the supported items in the display list will be opened up and displayed in the 3D viewer. So you click on this little icon at the top of mapping, and that'll open up and display our wells and our grid that we have displayed here in mapping, to display those in the 3D viewer. We also have cursor tracking. So now when we have both of the windows open, we can click and drag in one of those windows, and where we're just clicking and dragging will be displayed in both windows. So we have a point on that with a line through it in the 3D viewer, and the crosshairs in mapping, and we have the readouts for those at the bottom of each screen, and in 3D viewer we also have a readout at the intersection. And if you have more than one grid displayed, you'll see the readouts for each of those grids in the 3D viewer. We've also improved the layer management, so we now have all the same richness that we have in mapping, so we can create groups and rearrange layers, slide them up and down, and move those into the desired groups that we have in the 3D viewer, the same as we do in mapping. So some of the advancements that we've done allows it easier for workflow management. So here we've got some faults which are generated from our third-party application. You can see we don't have them intersecting, and we're looking at creating the structure here, which we know should be faulted out and go through. So what we can then do is create those fault sticks and edit those in the 3D viewer, in the spatial editor, generate those new faults, and then go back to the 3D viewer and see that those faults now intersect, and we've got a structure here that we can define in our LCC tool in volumetric and surface modeling, and then use that in the volumetric module. So if we were looking then to go into the lowest closing contours, we can generate the lowest closing contours, display our wells, those lowest closing contour polygons on our map, and we can see that we have intersections, and some of these wells may be dry holes. So we can then go back into our lowest closing contour assessment, assign that well as a dry hole, rerun that program or that task file, and we can then see that that closure has now been excluded from our lowest closing contour set, and we can then move forward with our reserves and our volumetric assessment. Looking at volumetrics, we can display our grid of interest in the 3D viewer, display the reference plane which coincides with our contacts for our hydrocarbons, add any of our wells of interest in, display the tops associated with those wells, QC those in a 3D view and make sure that it all makes geologic sense and it's the geological model that we expect, and then we can go back into the volumetric tools and surface modelling and run those volumetric assessments. So we can review that geological model, make sure it makes sense before we run that. I'll run a bit of a demonstration now to show you how the new 3D viewer looks. So here we have our mapping canvas open in Petrosys. We have 3 different grids, our 2 time grids are displayed. We've got some wells displayed from Petrel and displaying some log signatures from Petrel on that map. So we can simply now go to the 3D viewer icon, click on that in mapping. That opens up the 3D viewer, and you can see that we've got these items in the display list where they're being loaded now. And unfortunately, because we're running through teams, it tends to slow things down a little bit, but we're getting there. And once that's displayed, we can then create those groups and have a bit of a play around with that in the 3D viewer. So you can now see that we've got really good rendering. Once it's loaded into the 3D viewer, the surfaces render quite well and it's quite smooth when we rotate around. We can then highlight our grids, right click, and we can create groups on those grids. Call that 2 time. We can drag our wells to the top or drag our group to the bottom, and we can see that we've got all the same functionality that we have in the Petrosys mapping module. You can see it again in the top here, we've now got our new ribbon toolbars. So we have the display, the scene, and the help. And one thing that we should actually do while we're here is change our preferences as Z units. This is in depth, and we're actually running it in time, so we can change that here. Click OK, and then it will re-render those in time, so we can then make sure that we're displaying in our right domain. So while we're here, we can also have a look at the cursor tracking. So I'll just go back into the mapping module. I'll untick a couple of these grids in mapping, and I'll turn off the contours just to make it a little easier to do the cursor tracking. And so while that's loading there, we can now click and drag in mapping, and you can see that we have the cursor being displayed in the 3D viewer. And with the 3 grids in the 3D viewer reading out the tops for each of those grid intersections. If I go back into 3D viewer and turn 2 of those off and drag that around, we can just see that we have the one intersection with the readout being displayed in the 3D viewer. We can also do that in the 3D viewer, go to scene and pick mode. We can drag around in the 3D viewer and it will display in the mapping canvas. One of the other things we do, I'll just turn the wells off in the 3D viewer and I'll just pop up the Petrel project. I can grab the wells from Petrel, drag and drop those into the 3D viewer, and you can see that they quickly display in the 3D viewer. I can also go down and grab fault surfaces and drag and drop the fault surfaces into the 3D viewer, and they quickly display straight away. Then with those wells, I can turn off the well symbols and annotations, and under the log curves we can change the way that they display. So we've got the gamma ray pipe display. We can change that to a sand shale, and we got the 3D pipe or the 2D trace that we can choose from. So we can, I'll just turn a few of these off, turn these back on. I might just create a group of all of our faults, work faults, and then I can turn all of those faults off in one simple go. So in our pan view, the mode will move back around, go back into our worlds, and we'll finish off setting up our well log displays. We can go from 0 to 200, tick on have the fill, and we click apply to that, and then you can see when we zoom in, and if we hold the control key, we can slide that up and down and move that around. You can see there that we have our log being displayed. If we change that to a 3D pipe and click apply to that, we then have our pipe logs being displayed in the 3D viewer. Some of the other things that we can do is we can drag in so from mapping, we can open up our file explorer and go to grab some Excel spreadsheets. So we'll grab the top NES XLS, drag and drop that into the 3D viewer, and then I can open that up and we can set up the display. So we can set that we have a Z value, which is our depth, and then we can set our scalings. So we can set our scaling to be inverted or custom. We have our Z value selected, so we can select our symbol type to be a sphere or a cube, and we want our color. We can scale that an attribute and select. We want the thickness color for that, and then for our size, we can also go by attribute and scale that by size. I think I did that too large. We'll go back to 1 or 0.5. And you can see now that's even still too large. We'll go 0.1. And you can see now that we have our bubbles, which some of them are above and some of them are below, because these bubbles are in depth, so we need to display those in depth. So what we can do now is go back to our display, select our grid, and we can select a grid from Petrosys, or alternatively, we can go back to mapping and turn on our top NES. Actually, we want the well tied, so we'll turn those on, turn those two off, and while those render, I'll turn the wrong ones on, sorry. We can throw those out to the 3D viewer, and then again, we can, just wait for that, turn that one off. We can drag and drop that Excel spreadsheet into the 3D viewer. Has a Z value, and display that. Set our attribute to be our thickness. Invert our scaling. I think I've go 1. We can see now that our point data ties in with our surface, and we can control that and go around and check that all of our surfaces are correct. Once we're happy with that, we can also go to scene and display and put in a reference plane. We can select an X and a Y or a Z axis to display that again. If you want to do Z, we would put a minus in front of that. So now we can display a plane that we can then check against our columns for our known hydrocarbon contacts. And if we go to the pick mode, select that, we can then move that up and down and see the readout at the bottom of the screen and check that with our contacts and see if they line up with our well data and our contacts. Okay, I'll just finish the demonstration there. If there's any questions, we can go back and have a look at that at the end of the webinar. So we've got more on 3D Viewer in the Petrosys portal, so you can click to the Petrosys portal and click on the Learn tab and type in 3D Viewer, and then we'll get some 3D Viewer how-to documents on how to help do things in the 3D Viewer, and you can access that by going to the portal.petrosys.com.au. So thank you for your time.